So within ISO 27001 checklist, what is the vulnerability assessment and pen testing requirement? How often it has to be done? Any light on what specifically is required?
Right. So ISO 27001 will specifically ask you that you have to think holistically about where you should look for vulnerabilities, right? If I'm a software company, I obviously need to look for my vulnerabilities in my application, maybe in my hosting environment, etc. But if I'm basically a different kind of a company, then the vulnerabilities might be elsewhere. But you need to decide where is the right place to look for vulnerabilities. Like I again said, keep saying like ISO 27001 is a way to think about it. It's a framework rather than saying you look at it here itself. But there are natural implications of this. So, for example, you should be looking for vulnerabilities in your code base, in your application, in your environment where you're hosting your application as well. And you should do it on a continuous basis. I think, and the more important thing that ISO 27001 says is that it's not just important for you to look at vulnerabilities, but it is important for you to have a clear process as to what are you going to do with vulnerabilities that are found. You need to have a clear policy around, okay, we find a vulnerability, we're going to rate the vulnerability on severity. Like, there is something that tells us that this is the severity of the vulnerability in whatever form, like say low, medium, high, critical, or something like that. And based on the severity, you will have internal SLAs that, okay, if a vulnerability is of so-and-so severity, we as a company are committed to fixing that vulnerability and patching it within a certain amount of time. You could say, okay, for a high vulnerability, I'm going to fix it in, let's say, 7 business days or something like that. So you're basically taking on commitments of the sort that I am going to do this, in a certain amount of time. And depending on the lower vulnerabilities, you could take longer, etc. And the important bit is not only do you find vulnerabilities, you tag them, then you fix them, and you follow this process, and you make sure that you're reviewing the fact that this is actually happening. So it's not just about saying, okay, I have a policy that this is how we do it, but you need to make sure that it is actually being followed. So the program is talking about all of these kind of things. Pen test is also important in this. Like ISO says that you should look at this from both sides. Like you could look for vulnerabilities from an inside but you should also do like a black box testing. You should have somebody who is actively looking for vulnerabilities from the outside in your organization, and you should do that at least once a year. And whatever vulnerabilities are found in the pen test, follow the same process that I was talking about earlier. You tag them to the severity, you make sure they're getting fixed in a certain amount of SLA, you follow that process, and you collect evidence about the fact that you're doing this. So those are the requirements around vulnerabilities and penetration testing that ISO 27001 usually talk about.
Yeah, good. And I think I like the fact it is not just about finding, but also having some guidelines around having it fixed in a certain amount of time with SLAs and process for getting those. I remember long back in another standard like PCI, it just talked about, you need to have a process for finding it, and you need to have either fix it or have a firewall. People are not fixing it and having a firewall which is not fixing it too, right? So, and then they said either have to fix it in code or have it patched in a firewall. So the focus is on getting towards fixing it, addressing it, and improving a security posture, which is very refreshing to see that evolution and change happening, not just in the customer mindset, but also the standards and the compliance and the checklist maturing towards that thought process.